Yeah, I gotta go through a little. I gotta, you gotta click this. Are you sure? Are you sure? This, that. Okay, we should be live.
Hmm.
Okay, we are joined this hour live by Quetzal Flores, band leader of one of the band leaders of the legendary band Quetzal. He is a musician, obviously, folklorist, wears many hats. We're really, really excited. This is a Dawes Center for the Arts, part of our signature speaker series. The Dawes Center for Arts is a not-for-profit in Pomona, California, and we focus on we're an art lab as well as an art gallery, and we focus on helping people bring out the art inside of them in Pomona and surrounding areas. And now the world's on the internet, we are servicing the world. So we're really, really excited to be joined this hour by Quetzal. Quetzal Flores, can you tell us like let's begin the story in the beginning. Like how did you first get into music?
Um, so I guess my musical beginnings go back to um, first falling in love with music. I would say, my mom uh, played heavy doses of Stevie Wonder, played a lot of Earth, Wind and Fire, War. Um, there's music going on in the background right here. Sorry, my son.
Yeah.
So okay, so stuff like that, and Tower of Power was another big group during this time, and so I have fond memories of sitting in front of the record player and speakers and just kind of like sitting with the liner notes and the lyrics and just hearing this music, blasting and really enjoying that and able to listen to these albums over and over and over. And then flash forward to my early teens, and my brother, he went away to boarding school in Rhode Island through this program called The Better Chance, and he was hanging out with a lot of kids who had a lot of resources, and they would go on something called holiday during the vacation, and oftentimes traveled to Europe and then would come back with this music that weren't even imports yet. They were just people, bringing them across. And so, like the early albums from groups like the Smiths, from U2, from not REM was here, but The Cure, early Depeche Mode stuff. And so I really fell in love with that music as well. My brother would bring those albums back to Cali when he would get them from his friends, and then he would turn me on to this music. And then he started playing guitar, and I kind of wanted to be like my big brother. And so I started getting into guitar. And after one summer in LA, he went back to school and he left his guitar and his amp, and I just went to town on it and was, I couldn't get enough of it. And so that really is the beginning, like the moment where music is provoked within me, and I start to really develop the 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 love for learning how to express myself through an instrument.
So a lot of what we've been doing for here is trying to collect kind of oral histories about kind of like presses, labels, venues, whether they're around still or not. So, what are some of the early like venues you remember like playing or wanting to play at, or what were you looking towards?
So backyards. Oh wait, no. Let's see. Yeah, I guess backyards were like my first venue, right? For sure, East LA backyards, and it's a thing. The whole backyard party is a thing, and it's a rite of passage, if you will. It's a training ground. It's also a critical space for building community. Like I remember how important that was to not just myself and other musicians, but to the people that would go to these parties and to hear bands from their community, playing music and having a safe space to convene and to really actively witness the emergence of the the sounds of belonging, right? And so my first club gig, funny enough, was at the Whiskey. I was in a band. I joined a band called the Republic. They had already been around, and they had a whiskey gig, and I joined. The guitar player got kicked out for beating up his girlfriend, and then they asked me to join, and I joined, and we had a gig at the whiskey. And I just remember this was a time where there was a lot of tension. This was like an alternative rock band during a time when it wasn't cool to have an alternative rock band yet, and so metal was still a thing, right? And the night we played, we were the first band, and there was a bunch of metalheads in front. And the whole time, this one guy just was staring at me, going like this, nodding his head, and just doing that to me the whole time. It was terrifying. But you know, it was also exciting to play at the whiskey, and to you know, see firsthand what it was like to indulge in this idea of the Hollywood club, and like that, the legacy of LA music. You know, for me, you know, the Doors for sure, but like Fishbone and bands like that, you know, had graced those spaces. And so I wanted to see what it was about. And you know, I was 17 at the time, and so it was interesting.
Yeah, tell us more about this band, the Republic.
The Republic was an El Sereno institution, and you know, a bunch of guys from the neighborhood who loved alternative music. And there was a drummer named Willie Reyes, who's, you know, a longtime guy from the neighborhood that I hung out with. He brought me into the group. There was a keyboard player named Armando, I forget his last name. Singer for a time was a guy named David, and he moved to Tijuana, and Willie, the drummer, took over on vocals. Beto Solorio was the bass player, and then myself I was the guitar player. Before me was a guy named Jose.
Yeah. So do you remember, you know, in these backyards and in small clubs, do you remember some of the other bands that were playing at the time? What were some of the other groups that
Yeah,
backyards with?
of course, yes. So Homegrown was one of the bands. They were one of the big bands at the time in the backyard scene. There was a band called Hootenanny. They were really great. They played a lot of covers, but the musicians were excellent musicians. There was the Peace Pills, which became Olin later on. A couple of guys from the band Olin. There was who else? Yeah, those were the main groups, I would say, during that time. And then you know, later on it becomes something different. I went away for a couple of years, and I came back, and I formed another band called Aslan, and that band was with Marco Garcia, rest in peace, my brother. Willie was also the drummer for a time, and then a guy named Ozzy became the drummer. Osvaldo Favela is his last name. Andres Palacios was the bass player, and Gabriel Tenorio was the other guitar player. And then myself, and you know, it was a really interesting and creative band. And then that was another scene that then started, because Gabriel Tenorio had a relationship with a guy named Jesse Nunez, who also had a band called the Santeria Devil Dogs. And Jesse invited Gabriel to Troy Cafe, and then Gabriel eventually brought us into Troy Cafe to perform. And this is like the beginning of like the Troy Cafe becoming like an actual scene, right? And so in that scene, there was a group called Boca de Sandia. Boca de Sandia was Nicole Presley, who is the niece of Hope Sandoval from Mazzy Star. A drummer named E. Anthony Martinez, a bass player named Robert Guerrero, and a guitar player named Ruben. What's Ruben's last name? Gomez, Ruben Gomez. And that was another band. There was another band called the Blue Meanies. That was Rico Garcia, who was Marco's younger brother, and Josh Duron, and all these other crazy guys from Alhambra. And there was a whole scene. Las Tres had formed during that time, and that was Alice Bagg and Teresa Covarrubias from the Brat, and Angela Vogel from the Odd Squad, and so there was a lot of things happening at Troy Cafe during that time, and we really got to spend some good time with the generation prior to ours, who had a lot of experience and information and knowledge and wisdom around what it takes to build a scene, and then we also had a lot of our own ideas, and we had the emergence of the Zapatista movement that was utterly inspiring and created a very a new set of possibilities for us as artists in a community.
Yeah. So I want to get to a lot of that, but before that, I'm kind of curious about some of the things that you presented here. So you said you went away for a few years, and so you leave the Republic and come back and form Aslan. So that's a very interesting story to me. So where did you go, and how were you reconfigured to form Aslan?
I went to San Francisco to school, and then I just kind of figured out it wasn't for me. And I went with Marco Garcia, my brother, as I said earlier, my homie. And we came back, and we were like, we don't really want to be in school. We want to play music, and so when we came back, and the Republic wasn't my band, just to be clear. Mm-hmm. I played guitar in the Republic, but it definitely wasn't my band. And Aslan was something that I was forming with a bunch of other guys, like-minded guys who had a vision and had social consciousness and critiques, and we were trying to build something, and it wasn't just building the business of the band. It was really trying to be a part of a larger movement and have impact and have a voice.
And so what movement was that at that time, and what years are we talking about here?
So we're talking about 93, 92, 93. And it's spilling into 94 a little bit, but by 93, Quetzal is formed, and that comes out of Aslan, really.
Okay, so when you form Quetzal, but now you're discovering, and we're not discovering, but you're making different kind of music than you were before. So what accounts for that shift? What accounts for that desire to
Great question. So at the same time that Aslan was ending, I met a guitar player named Marcos Loya, who was from a band called Califas from the 70s and 80s. He was a great guitar player and a very generous human being. And he introduced me to somebody named Lorenzo Martinez, Lencho. And that's my lifelong teacher. That's my mentor. And Lencho, he said to me once, he's like, "Hey, Flaco, that's cool. You like that rock shit, but you need to learn your music. You need to learn your tradition. You need to learn your traditional music. There's a lot of information that's useful. That'll be useful to you." And so he put a jarana on my hands. And once he put that jarana in my hands, I completely bonded with it, and I got lost in that music, in the son jarocho music, and in the instrument itself. And I spent a lot of time really learning how to play it and utilize it as an effective tool, not just in the tradition, but also, or in the tradition of son jarocho, but understanding that important connection between son jarocho music and East Los Angeles and Chicano rock, right? And there's a very powerful legacy there, and that is, it really, like, it comes to head with Richie Valens recording La Bamba in 59 and or 58, one of those years, and articulating our lived reality as Mexican people living in this country and really being resilient and resistant in the face of brutality and abandonment, and claiming the Mexican roots, and also uh, you know, extending our hand out and holding on to the Black people's struggle and Black people's lived reality here in the U.S. And what Richie Valens did was articulate all of that in one song, in one recording, right? Like the music is of Black expression, right? It comes from Black expression. It's rock and roll, right? And he was listening to Chuck Berry, and he was listening to, you know, stuff like that, Little Richard, and that's the roots of rock and roll. Sister Rosetta Tharpe is one of the other roots of rock and roll, and these are all Black people. And so then he takes a Mexican tune and he shapes it into this expression that is so familiar to him and that he has an affinity with. And then this is Chicano rock, you know, that moment. And it was absolutely revolutionary, and it's resounding today even. And then Los Lobos, you know, years later, they re-record La Bamba, but they also do something very important. That's they utilize the instruments and the isms of the tradition to create new pieces. And you can hear that in La Pistola del Corazón, and in some of the recordings on that. You can hear it in Be Still, the song Be Still, which is probably one of my favorite songs still in the world today. And that's off of the Neighborhood album. They did it on the song Saint Behind the Glass on the Kiko album, and on and on. Every album, there's something in there, like they're referencing that Son Jarocho, and that's a whole legacy that belongs to a community of practice, which is Chicano music, right? And so for me, like, I feel like it wasn't an accident that this instrument ended up in my hands, and that I was able to develop such a strong relationship with it instantly, you know?
Yeah. So I want to get into the specifics of Quetzal, how it formed, who was involved, and all those things. But before we do that, you know, these talks are kind of designed, you know, at some point in time for a wide variety of people who might not be familiar with the ins and outs of various things. So could you tell us a little bit about Los Lobos and why they loom so large over Chicano rock or Chicano music culture, everything?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's their body of work, and how thorough and well crafted it is. It's their commitment to story sharing in a way that is so real and organic and authentic and fluid. It's their ability their mastery, really, in navigating all kinds of different styles of music, either in isolation or, you know, together all at once. It's their like, you know, really, again, the lyrical mastery, you know, in telling a story, you know, something like, let's take A Matter of Time, you know, speak softly, don't wake the baby, come and hold me once more before I have to leave, because there's a lot of work out there, and everything will be fine, and I'll send for you, baby, in just a matter of time. I mean, this is a powerful story that resonates with any immigrant community. You know, anybody who has struggled to make ends meet, to put food on the table, and had to take make a difficult, impossible decision to travel into dangerous waters or dangerous lands to arrive at another possibility, to be human again, and to sustain your family, and to really, you know, create possibilities. And so, you know, and that's just one example. They have so many examples of this type of mastery and connection to the human experience, and definitely to the Chicano experience, right? And then there's the album Kiko, which to me is probably like top 3 greatest albums of all time. and they hit a point where they were just so dialed into a creative impulse and of story sharing, and that album itself is just everybody should be listening to that album.
Yeah.
And then there's David Hidalgo, who's just a fucking genius and a master of all things.
Yeah. No, incredible, incredible. So another thing, okay, I don't know why. Again, I want to get into the beginnings of Quetzal and who was involved, how to get formed, all that good stuff, and then get into the tremendous legacy that you've created and the tremendous work you're still continuing to do. But before we get to that, you also mentioned the Troy Cafe, and I had an opportunity to interview Frankie Hernandez, who's a poet, became screenwriter.
No, Frankie. Yeah.
You mentioned the Troy Cafe. Soraya M, who managed a bookstore, owned a bookstore. She
Soraya,
mentioned the
yeah.
Troy Cafe. So we're getting all these stories about the Troy Cafe. Can you tell us about what the Troy Cafe was, who was there, what it meant to you?
Sure. So Sean Carrillo, a former member of ASCO, which was a avant-garde artist collective from the 70s, 80s, did some really important work. They Sean Carrillo and his partner Bibi Hansen, who came from New York and was part of like the whole Warhol scene, and was also the mother of Beck. They had this idea to form a cafe, and I'm going to say it was a community space, community center design or disguised as a cafe, right? And I'm pulling this from something I heard from some friends in Seattle that talk about a restaurant like that, because there was a restaurant in Seattle called Hidmo that reminded me of Troy Cafe because of what it was designed to do, and that's to bring people together and to build community, and to use the pretext of a cafe or a restaurant or business to create this space, right? And that's what Troy really was. It was that pretext to build a scene, a community where Chicano and Chicana artists could come together and build community and perform and test new ideas and fail and succeed and to really create this system of belonging, where in a time where there was no spaces like that. Self-help graphics had shut its doors to this type of thing because the Vex, the punk rock club known as the Vex, almost destroyed the hall at Self-help graphics when it was on Gage. There was no Aslan Foundation. We didn't have access to the Hollywood clubs without having to pay to play, right? And that wasn't necessarily something we wanted to do. And we had other visions also in building spaces in our own neighborhoods where you could see quality music and art, right? And why not? Our communities deserve to be able to have access to these things. And so Troy Cafe was all of that. And it was this intergenerational space, an important intergenerational space where myself as a young man was able to really bond with people from previous generations and future generations and really learn how to be a community artist.
Okay, so the moment has arrived. Now, how did Quetzal, the band, form? Who was involved? And tell us the backstory on that.
Yeah, so my lifelong friend Maceo Hernandez, who now has a band called East LA Taiko, he was in Japan for a number of years and had a horrible accident in Japan. He was part of a touring group called Ondekosa. I think he went over there when he was like 13 years old and didn't come back till he was 21. And so he spent these formative years as a taiko drummer in Japan. It's a very long story. There's a documentary called it's called Demon Drummer from East LA, Maceo Demon Drummer from East LA, by Janisaki. And so when Maceo came back after this horrible accident, which he lost his left leg in the accident and could no longer sustain the rigorous training it took to be in part of this group, he came back with desires of forming a band. And so he and I got together and we created a band. We created the band Quetzal. And the name actually, it wasn't Quetzal. We didn't have a name, and we had our first gig at Troy Cafe, and Jesse Nunez, um, he he introduced us, and he said, it's the world premiere of, and he looks back and he's like, Quetzal, right? And that was it. And that he actually named the group that. I would have preferred it for it not to be my name. I don't necessarily like public attention like that, even though I'm on a stage a lot performing. So that was the moment that he named the band, and it was Maceo playing percussion, a singer named Lili Hernandez, the bass player from Boca de Sandia, Robert Guerrero, and then E. Anthony Martinez was the drummer. And that was the initial band. And then it shifted. Lilia went to grad school, and then Marta, my partner, came into the band at that moment. 2 years in, Maceo left. My cousin Rocio was a part of the original band. She stayed for a while, and then Dante Pescuzo came into the band. A drummer named Danilo Torres came into the band. He recorded on the first album, and then the rest is just like all these different iterations throughout history.
Yeah, but the core of the band has been you and Martha. Is that
correct?
So can you tell us about a little bit about I mean it's kind of almost awkward, but like the what is the what is that musical partnership in at the core of the band? How do you describe
it? Yeah, like any relationship, it's beautiful, it's painful, it's struggle, it is productive, unproductive, and it has its ebbs and flows. And ultimately, though, there's an understanding in a way that we agree on expression, and this particular expression, right, of this band. And so, yeah, it's dynamic, fluid.
Like that. So earlier you mentioned being influenced by the Zapatistas in the South, the movement, Zapatismo. Can you expand upon that a little bit? Like how did that affect you personally? Like just you as a human being, like witnessing that, and also how is it found its way into your music?
So January 1st, 1994, my dad ran downstairs. I was living in his house at the time, a little side room, and he ran downstairs and he was like, "Did you hear what's happening in Mexico?" And he's like, and he's so excited, and he's reading as much as he can, and he's looking for more and more information, and he's getting all these articles and whatnot. And then he decides to take off over there and go check out what was happening as part of a peace delegation. And then, he would feed me a lot of information. And this is the very beginning. And the internet wasn't like a robust thing at the time. You couldn't get, that much information. And so, but understanding what was happening and understanding that an indigenous-led revolution was happening in Mexico, and that the center of this revolution was a human agenda, an agenda of humanity and dignity, and reclaiming humanity and dignity, was really, really powerful. And it really affirmed some things that I was feeling. I had grown up with parents who were Marxist-Leninists, and so that wasn't enough for me. I had a lot of questions. I had a lot of doubts. I also understood that there's a lot of hurt that happens in these movements as well. And so for me, seeing the Zapatista movement come into play, gave me the permission or the green light to begin to ask these questions more thoroughly and deeply to myself and to others. And so, um, and then also to center culture and art in these questions, whereas social movement up to then tended um, to treat art and culture as an ornament, to ornamentalize these things, right? And to pull them in when they needed entertainment, and to understand them as, you know, as non-essential pieces to the real organizing, or you know, or the closing when everybody's leaving and the important speakers happened, and you know, that kind of shit. And so this is where those inquiries began for me too. Is like, you know, okay, well, I don't want to just be a performer on a stage. You know, I want to be able to land these skills that I'm developing as a musician and as an artist, land them into community settings. And you got a little bit of that when you did the Saludarte thing at Hellebeck Park, facilitating a poetry workshop in a community with people from varied experiences, but you know, everyone pretty much is struggling, right? And so, so that I think for me, that's one of the big takeaways from the Zapatista movement was this opening of a door that I had already written a lot of questions on, you know, and being able to walk through that door and begin the process of healing and of building capacity to do these things.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little more broadly about what does that look like? What are the, I mean, I know you can't speak for anyone else, but you got to speak for, you know, but for yourself. What are kind of like, what are the political messages and ideas that you are bringing to this project, Quetzal? What are the political ideas you want to get through then?
So it's the band, but it's also, you know, me as an artist. And the band itself has been like one of the vehicles. The Fandango community, the Son Jarocho music and the Fandango community has been another one of those vehicles. And then the arts community that I really emerged with is another one. And that's like, you know, all the folks that were at Troy Cafe, all the folks that were at the Popular Resource Center, Centro de Regeneración in Highland Park, all the folks that were at Self-Help Graphics, all the folks that were at the Aslan Foundation in Lincoln Heights, the old city jail that was converted into community space. So, you know, all those spaces were part of my formation and my shaping, and continue to be, inform the way that I try my best to land in community in good ways. And like some tangible examples would be, you know, like being a part of the folks that thought that the Fandango was a really important thing, that we should transplant it from Veracruz into, you know, communities here. That's work. That takes a lot of work. And that was a lot of people that did a lot of work together to make sure that this was a space and an accessible space for people in our communities.
Yeah. So, you know, the Siqueiros, he comes to Los Angeles, I don't know, 30, 40 years before I'm born. The Danzantes, they come into, you know, kind of going back and forth, probably about 15 years before I was born. Some of Teatros companies, they come in about whatever before I was born. But I actually kind of like that kind of thing happened within my lifetime. You see the Fandangos and the Son Jarocho come from Mexico. So can you speak to how the Fandango kind of that kind of that kind of I don't know I want to use the right word here, but that kind of transmission, um that kind of back and forth, going back from back to Mexico, that kind of the motherland kind of thing. And how does this particular thing play within the long history of arts, going back and forth?
Yeah, well, again, Veracruz and East LA have this long-standing history, and you have um, a group that started playing son jarocho in the 1940s, late 40s here. A guy named Bobby Chagoya, still alive, and who had a group called Conjunto Papaloapan. And those guys, they were, as far as I know, they were the first guys to be playing son jarocho in this area. And then there were some artists from Veracruz that came to live here. One in particular named Andres Huesca. And I think he might have died here as well. And then there was the traveling musicians like Lino Chavez and folks. And Huesca was a traveling musician as well. But these folks would come play in Los Angeles, right? And so, but it was still performance, right? And so then when we start to really have questions about, like, okay, what is there beyond the stage in music? What did people used to do when music was more of like a regular thing in your life? How did people hang out with music? And the fandango was a clear example. And I also have another mentor named Russell Rodriguez, who was already connected to these communities. And some of the Bay Area folks were already connected to a group named Mono Blanco in particular, and to these communities down there. And but LA didn't have a relationship and didn't know about the fandango per se. And so there's another guy named Marco Amador who went to Veracruz on like a soul searching mission to find his roots, and he comes across these folks as well, and he invites Mono Blanco to LA, and then we that's when the relationship really started. And then a year later, there's a concert at the Ford Amphitheater that was organized by Aida Salazar, Lalo Medina, Marco Amador, and a couple of other folks. And it invited Son de Madera and Mono Blanco to come and perform at the Ford Amphitheater with Quetzal, with Conjunto Jardín, which is a group of son jarocho musicians from LA. And from there, this is where the conversations really started around like the fandango and the translocal, transnational dialogue, shared resources, building a network, really kind of. And then when we first went down to Veracruz as a group of people, 2002, there was a really important conversation that happened, and that was that we weren't there to learn how to be Mexican, that we are firmly rooted in our Chicano history and traditions.
Yeah.
No, it's a thing. It's a real thing.
It's always a thing, but I mean,
yeah, it's a thing. And so this conversation was very important because it sort of stated a position that was necessary, and that is, we are not Mexican, and we are not trying to be Mexican. Our lived reality is not that of a person who grew up and lived in Mexico. All of those subtle things that culture brings us are not the same for us. We have a different set of understanding and experiences. And we value deeply Mexican culture. And the pieces of it that we have been able to hold on to and recover, that we value those things very deeply as well. And that we are there to build a movement together, and not simply to be cultural tourists and learn how to play, their curious little guitars and play their music, and to soothe our cultural deficiencies. and that we had a history, and we had that history with us, and those ancestors with us, and that we were strong, and that we came to collaborate. And so I think this was a really important point, because it forced them to look at us very differently and to engage us in that way. And some of the folks we had already had conversations with previous to that understood where we were coming from. And so, and some people left the room when we said this, because they were like, fuck these fools. They said they're not Mexican, they're sellouts, and why are we engaging with them when we have our own set of problems? These guys are fucking stupid. Right. Yeah. And so, so I think, for me, that relationship, there's a very intentional relationship there, and that's not to feel sorry for, or, provide charity for our poor Mexican friends, nor is it, again, operating from a point of deficiency and building a relationship with folks based on, them teaching us how to be right. And so, nor is it, a transactional relationship. These are really deep and sustainable relationships that have been going on for almost 20 years now. Yeah. And so, so the fandango itself has been a very powerful tool for us here. It's built communities in a lot of ways. It's also, like I said earlier, there's been a lot of harm in these spaces, and we're trying to navigate these things as best we can, and we continue to learn as we build them and fortify them.
Yeah, no, I like that though. Kind of like that. The phrase that came to mind is like neither saviors nor doormats. We're not here to like, not here to like, oh, here we come, and we're not here to also get beat up. So I mean, that's the right way to learn anything. Well, this has been a very beautiful communal history that you offered us just now. But I gotta ask you, like on a personal level, what was it like to like have be participating all these bands coming from all over the place to play the Ford Amphitheater? I mean, that must have been like a really cool moment.
Son de Madera was already I was like, obsessed with them. I mentioned my other teacher, Russell Rodriguez, one of my mentors. Russell gave me a Son de Madera album, and I was blown away. I couldn't stop listening to it. And actually, that album, I probably made 100 copies of that. I probably burned 100 CDs of that album, and handed them out to the guys from Ozo, to the guys from Alpha Underground, like to all the bands that were around during that time. Everybody had that album. I know that was Will Dog was bumping that album for a long time. Kinetic, who was the MC from Ozo at the time, was bumping that album. I know Raul was bumping that album. And so by the time I met Son de Madera, I was a huge fan already. Huge fan. And when they got on that stage, it blew me away. It blew me away. And hanging out with them and watching them, do their creative shit, and they're all virtuosos. And so like watching them was just like, okay, I got to go practice. I need to go practice. It was really inspiring. And at the same time, they were just they are really beautiful and generous people, and very humble people. And so, and Mono Blanco too, the group Mono Blanco is the same. And in that group, you had the elder, like a community elder in the group, and who was a fucking master himself, and who was the mentor of the guy from Son de Madera, and then the brother of the guy from Son de Madera is the brother from the guy from Mono Blanco. So it's all like all these intermixings and intertwining of family and community, and they all grew up together. And so, yeah, like hearing that music live was probably the best concert I've ever been to. I forgot that I had been on the stage earlier. It was about watching them and really digging into like, deep listening, and just, fuck, it was powerful.
Yeah. So I don't know about you, but I don't get to talk to Grammy Award winners every day. So what was that like? Like being there, going there, seeing, and just like, what was it like?
Yeah, it was confusing. for a lot of reasons. Um, One, because there's a set of values and criteria that you set for yourself that is oftentimes the antithesis of the industry, and the Grammys being sort of this pinnacle of the shallowness and pretentiousness of the industry, right? And at the same time, I know there are a lot of people that pulled for us to win that Grammy, you know? And so I don't want to discount that either. I want to value that people did work in order for us to get that. I also want to say that Anna Tijoux was one of the other nominees. And I love Anna Tijoux, and she's a fucking beast, right? And that, you know, like, I just want to recognize her because she's such an important musician to me. And so we didn't think we were gonna win. We were like, you know, long shot, like whatever. But we went, and you know, and it took a little bit of coercing for me to go and put on a suit. So then we sat in the back. We were all back there, and we were watching, you know, Bonnie Raitt walk by, and I'm like, oh shit, there's Bonnie Raitt. And like, oh, Bonnie Raitt's bad, dude. She's fucking amazing. Yeah. And Dr. John was still alive. He passed by. I was like, oh shit, there's Dr. John. And we were just like watching these different musicians who, you know, they're celebrities, but you know, they're also real musicians, real songwriters and creators and thinkers, and so that was really cool. And then the moment came where our category came up, and they were like, you know, the nominees are blah 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 blah, and the winner is, and the guy he mispronounced both our name and the title of the album. The title was Imaginaries, right? And the band's name is Quetzal. He said Quetzal, Imaginarias, right? And so we were like just looking at each other like confused, right? And then the album cover comes out on the screen, and Alberto, our percussionist, he's like, holy shit, we won, right? And so we start walking down the aisle to, you know, receive the award. And then we see Los Cojolites, one of our groups, homie groups from Veracruz. And we're like, oh, what's up? And we start, you know, hugging them and like, you know, touching them, and like, we love them. We want to. They were also nominated for the category right after us, which was traditional music. And then we're getting on the stage, and we see all of the musicians, like the badass musicians from LA, are all part of the group on the stage, like the house group, right? Yeah. And so we're like, oh, there's so and so, and there's so and so, and you know, like, you know, but these are all the dudes, like, and the women. These are all the badass musicians. Yeah. And so we're like geeking out, and then we're like, oh yeah, okay. So we get on the stage, and then, you know, we do our thing, blah blah blah, and then we get off, and then they take the award away from us. They're like, oh, it's just a prop, you know? Yeah. And we're like, what? Okay, wait. And then we go to the next. They usher us into this next room to take a picture, and it's a new prop. And then there's like props, these Grammy props everywhere. and then we get to the end, and we, you know, we're sort of like ushered out. And then we're like, okay, like what happened? What just happened?
You got ushered out of the building?
Yeah.
So you couldn't go back to your seats?
We could go back into the seats, but we didn't.
You'd have to enter in.
Yeah, you have to go all the way around again. You have to go through. You got to go through press and all that shit, right?
So, yeah. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh wow.
You know, and then there's a lot of red carpet stories too, but I'll save those for another time.
Yeah, no. That's fantastic. That's wow. That's a really cool story. So,
but the night before, we did have our own event. There's a lot of Grammy events, right, in Hollywood. And so we had decided to have one on the east side at the Breed Street Shul. And so we had our own event, and Los Cojolitas performed. La Marisol was there. We performed. This Andres Flores, rest in peace. He also performed. He was part of another nominee called oh shit. It's called Electro Jarocho was the name of the album. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the group right now. But yes, so a bunch of us performed at this event on the east side, and it was packed, and there was a line outside, a bunch of people didn't get in, and it was food. It was really beautiful. It was very beautiful.
I have two technical questions, right? Okay, so one, how long did it take you to get your actual like statue and stuff?
Months.
All right, and my second question is, did you have to buy a suit, or did you already have a suit?
That's another story. So my brother, he's you know, he's in the finance world, and he was getting married in Boston, and I was living in Mexico at the time, and he would communicate with me through my mom, and so he invited me to his wedding, and he said, tell Quetzal not to dress cheap. He has to wear a business suit, and tell him I'll pay for it, right? Because I didn't have money. And so I went to a store called Liverpool in Jalapa, Veracruz, which is like I guess the fanciest store. It's like a Nordstrom type store. And I saw this Hugo Boss Italian suit.
Okay.
And I was like, and I put it on. I was like, damn, this fits me, and it fit nice. And they did some tailoring to it. And I looked at the price. It was $1,000.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck it. He said he was gonna pay for it, so I just charged it, and then sent him the bill. He's like, what the fuck you doing?
See,
like, fuck it.
You never know, because like, you know, you try to stay true to your roots, try to do whatever. Hey, you know, the Grammys and that. At the same time, you know, there goes Bonnie Raitt. She's probably wearing like a $10,000, like, you know, like, gotta like.
Yeah. No. So that's the suit That's the suit I have. That's the only suit I've ever had. So,
yeah. That's, you know, quality, right? Quality. All right. So what was Tiny Desk like?
Tiny Desk was beautiful. We have a lot of friends at NPR, and you know, that's a really cool show, and we instead of Bolin hosting us that day, it was my homie oh my god, I'm not gonna remember his name right now. My mind is not working. Anyhow, so we because of my homie, we got invited, and we just showed up, and it was just like we thought. It was a tiny desk, and there was always CDs and shit behind us, and it's a small space. They put up a couple mics, and we just go.
Yeah.
And you know, for us, it was easy because we're so used to playing acoustic music, and we didn't have to take all the, you know, some people take like their whole band, they just play quiet.
Yeah.
And I'm like I don't know, like I always imagine like, okay, this is your chance to imagine something different and then like present it in a different way.
Yeah.
But it was really beautiful.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. So I had the great opportunity to interview Norma Cantu, and it is a great I want to be, you know, it's a great opportunity to interview as well. But I had a great opportunity to interview Norma Cantu, and she was talking a lot about like folklore, being a folklorist and whatever. And you're kind of in that vein as well, like as a folklorist and working with like, the Smithsonian as well. Can you tell us a little about that, like what the work with that has been?
So yeah, I'm currently on the board still. I'm about to term off of the Smithsonian Folkways Recorders, which we've released albums on, and we're about to release a new album on called Puentes Sonoros later on this year. And I also have participated in the Folk Life Festival for many years as a presenter, as a performer. And, you know, the Smithsonian is a huge institution. And like any huge institution, there's some really radical people in there, you know, doing some important work. those are the people that I gravitate towards, and I'm able to really, do amazing things with. Um, I also, on a statewide level, I work for an organization called the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, and that's a really important organization. It's the only traditional arts organization in California, and some of the programs are like the Arts and Corrections program, and that's actually what the organization that you worked with when you did the Saludarte thing at Hollenbeck Park. And so I've learned so much being in this space of folklore and traditional arts, because one, it taught me that I myself am a traditional artist, that I come from a community of practice, Chicano music, and gave me a way to talk about it, right? And to really articulate this community that I come from and this practice. And then it also gave me like sort of like the feelers for like, seeing magic in the most seemingly simple things, and so I think that's the power of being in the world of folklore and traditional arts.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff. So
To be fair, it's something that also comes from being in community with the Zapatistas, who are indigenous, culture bearers themselves through and through, and also the Fandango being in those communities, because it's all a part of that same sort of ecosystem, and you start to see the same things repeat themselves in all these traditional spaces.
yeah, no, I think I think that like much like Norma, your work is very seamless, and I think that these concepts of calling, is this folklore, is this oral history, is this testimonial? I mean, yeah, it is what it is, and like, and you, it's only it's only a mystery because you've kept us out. That's the only reason it's so mysterious to a lot of these people.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you spending this hour with us. Can you tell us a little bit about just some of the titles, some of the albums, some of the things people should check out from the band? Yeah, I'll start there. But
Yeah, I mean, the music's accessible on YouTube, Spotify if you have that, if you pay subscriptions. If not, shoot me an email and I'll send you stuff. But it's, each album is its own sort of moment in time that's captured, but it's also very much fluid in the way that it reaches back into history, into the past, the way that it's rooted in a particular moment, but also in the way that it extends and reaches towards a future, in the lyrical content, but also in the musical development, right? So yeah, I mean, I think there's like, people always ask me that, what's your favorite album, right? And I don't know that I can identify that. I know that I have favorite moments in creating the albums, great stories within those moments. I know that there's times where I'll have to go back and listen to stuff, and that I have an appreciation for things that I had forgotten about, or that maybe I hadn't thought about before, when listening to these things.
Yeah.
There's definitely a deep appreciation for all the musicians who have contributed to these albums, and every one of them has been an excellent musician and a monumental contributor to the sound and to the legacy. I didn't do this alone, and I'm a part of a really committed group of people who also had a vision and also had a voice in creating this body of work.
Yeah. So I was about to, the one I'm really curious about, just on a personal level, what inspired it. I was about to make fun of the guy that kind of, you were saying at the Grammys, who kind of Hispanicized both the, called you Quetzal or whatever, and then translated the English word into Spanish, imaginaries into imaginaries. But I want to know, but I will horribly mispronounce this album. Was it Quetzal?
Los Animales.
Yeah.
Animales. Yeah.
So what inspired that?
So I have a longtime collaborator, like video collaborator. His name is Akira Bach. He is a part of a crew called Smoke and Mirrors, and he he we were talking one day, and we always kind of feed off each other and shoot ideas at each other. And he's like, have you ever done a project where you set parameters, you set limits, and that based on those limits, you have to be utterly resourceful and imaginative and creative. And I was like, oh, and he comes from Teatro Campesino. Actually, he grew up next door to Teatro Campesino,
Okay.
the site. And so he grew up with Kinan and Anawak and all those guys, Lakin. And so he, he's a teatrista, but at the same time, video is his main thing. Mm-hmm. And so when he said that, I was like, shit. So then I brought this to the band and I was like, hey, why don't we set some parameters and blah, 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 blah. And they were like, all right. And so we started thinking about some parameters. And so if you listen to that album, there's no electric instruments. They were one of the parameters was like, okay, I just want to play acoustic instruments. I don't want to electrify them. I don't want to plug them in and distort them and do all the crazy things that I usually do. I want to just play acoustic instruments. And then the other one was like, okay, no drum set. It's going to be like percussion, like, driven. And then it was like, okay, only themes about animals that we can find in an urban setting, right?
All right. So no guitar. Okay, I get it. No drum sets. Okay, I get it. Where did that last idea come from?
Just coming up with ideas. Like, and actually, so Son Jarocho often deals with nature, right? Mm. And a lot of those folks come from the campo, from the fields. And, it's not crazy to think that they'd be singing about a macaw bird, or it's not crazy to think that they'd be singing about an iguana, right? But that's not shit that exists here.
Right.
We have coyotes and ants, mm-hmm. and, and stray dogs and squirrels, pigeons, that's spiders. Those are the things we have here. And so why don't we dive into their world and explore their world for a little bit and kind of draw that connection between us and them, and understand how their lives can impact us and how our lives have been impacting them, And so those are the tales that you hear in Quetzal Animales.
And it's an incredibly poignant album. I mean, it was kind of remember when I was a kid, they had that movie about those rabbits and like cats are killing them and stuff like that. It was,
oh yeah,
down or something like that. It was
yeah.
But it had that level of like, I was really like, I was that pigeon. I was that.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you spending this hour talking. Is there anything you want to, like, any piece of advice that you want to offer to people? Anything that you think they should connect to in this time that you're involved with, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big movement right now. We're living in unprecedented times, and there's a big movement right now to cancel rent and cancel mortgages, and to really put the onus on the banks, on the government and the banks to do what needs to be done to, one, protect people, particularly vulnerable people, and then two, to set a precedent that goes beyond this moment of COVID-19, and so there's actually a website that's cancelrent.us that has a list of demands and kind of plugs you into this national movement of people thinking about this and working towards applying that pressure. And so, I feel like in a very good friend and incredible thinker named Maria Rosario Jackson. You know, she, in a discussion we had recently on a call, she was saying, you know, we have to seize this moment. Like, it's because everything is going to snap back into what it was, or worse. So what are we going to do to create bold and imaginative spaces moving forward, right? And so this is the time to really be thinking about those things, and to not to be thinking about them alone, but to get together with other people and think about them in ways that can be empathetically systematized as we come back, right?
I apologize. I do have one question from the audience. Ruben Guevara asks about Fandango Bon or Fandango Bon.
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry, Ruben. You're right. I didn't even talk about that. So yeah, one of the beautiful things about the Fandango is its ability to connect to other like communities, right? And so there's this beautiful human being that I met several years ago named Nobuko Miyamoto. And Nobuko is a part of the Obon community, that is the Japanese, and by extension Japanese American, honoring of the ancestors. And there's a lot of similarities between Obon practice and Fandango. And so so Nobuko and I decided to strategize and to build a celebration, or, you know, that we're trying to transition into a movement called Fandango Bon, and that is bringing together African American music and dance, participatory music and dance practices, along with the Japanese American Obon, which is a participatory music and dance practice, and then the Fandango, which is also one of those, into one space once a year to dialogue and to really build synergy and relationships between these communities that once had a lot of interaction and solidarity. And so this is one of the ways in which we intend to build solidarity between these communities through this action. And the big event happens once a year, but there's a series of workshops and events that happen throughout the year. And so that's a really important one too. And it always happens at the end of September, early October, on the Japanese American Community Center Plaza.
Yeah. Well, Quetzal, I'm deeply grateful for your time. I really, really appreciate it, and hope to connect to you soon and more often.
Thank you, Matt. Peace.